Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And speaking of books, I have two of my own books coming out this spring and summer. Princess Charming is a picture book, which debuts on April 19th, and Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, comes out on July 1st, and it is truly a labor of love. I hope you'll pre-order, order, and join me on tour as I go across the country. You can find out more at zibbyowens.com or bookendsmemoir.com. And you can follow me on Instagram at zibbyowens because I always post about everything. Enjoy the show. Hampton Sides is the author of In the Kingdom of Ice, the grand and terrible polar voyage of the USS Jeannette. Hampton is the author of the best-selling narrative histories Ghost Soldiers, Blood and Thunder, Hellhound on His Trail, and, again, In the Kingdom of Ice. His most recent book, On Desperate Ground, was named a Best Book of the Year by the Washington Post and is under development for the screen. Hellhound on His Trail, about the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. and the hunt for his killer, was the basis of the acclaimed PBS documentary Roads to Memphis. His journalistic works have been frequently anthologized, and he is a two-time National Magazine Award finalist. He's now at work on a book about the fateful last voyage of Captain James Cook, which we discuss. Also, starting May 20th, 2022, is the inaugural Santa Fe Literary Festival, which anyone who is near Santa Fe should definitely check out. We discuss it on this podcast. There will be many other people. Hampton Sides is going to be in conversation with John Grisham, and other participants include Margaret Atwood, Joy Harjo, John Grisham, as I said, Sandra Cisneros, George R.R. Martin, Emily St. John Mandel from Station 11, and many more. And Hampton will be talking about his book, In the Kingdom of Ice. Authors explore issues at a time of extraordinary change in politics, race, immigration, the environment, food sustainability, and more, as the festival will offer good old-fashioned storytelling. Walking tours in the famous historic town with delicious food tastings are part of the package of this debut event, which I am so sad that I cannot attend this year, but I definitely want to put it on the calendar for next year. The festival is a destination event not to be missed. The fiscal sponsor is the 501c3 Fractured Atlas, and their founding partners include the City of Santa Fe, the Independent, and the Independent Espanol, Collected Works Bookstore, the Santa Fe Public Library, the Whitner Bynner Foundation for Poetry, Table Magazine, the New Mexican, and the Authors Guild. By the way, they are also giving away 2 tickets for 7 stage events. To see more about the festival, have a look at all of the amazing events at sfliteraryfestival.org. Again, that's sfliteraryfestival.org. And listeners to this podcast, if you want to enter the giveaway for 2 tickets to this event starting May 20th, 2022 in Santa Fe, email info@zibbyowens.com and just write giveaway or Santa Fe, and we will randomly select 2 people. Thanks for listening. Welcome, Hampton. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss In the Kingdom of Ice, and also your career, and also the Santa Fe Literary Festival. So welcome.
Oh, thank you. Great to be with you.
That was a mouthful. So we originally were connected through the festival. So tell me more about it. I know it's the inaugural year. There's a whole slate of amazing guests coming. Tell me about your involvement. I know you were a fellow or something for 1 year. So tell me all about it.
Well, Santa Fe, is a little hick town here in the desert Southwest. And yet we've always prided ourselves on being a place that artists and bohemian folks and musicians, and especially writers, come to maybe to get away from the rest of the world and to dream up all kinds of great novels and poems and screenplays and novels and so forth. So it seemed like a no-brainer when the idea came to the fore a couple of years ago to create, finally, a Santa Fe Literary Festival that would really bring together some of the greatest writers in the country, if not the world, to celebrate this peculiar spot here, at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, that has this long history of letters. But then COVID interrupted the plans for 2 straight years. Maybe it was even 3 years. And so finally it's coming together. And this year we're going to have, we have John Grisham coming. We have Margaret Atwood coming. We have Colson Whitehead coming. Of course, George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, lives here in Santa Fe and will be a big part of the festival. On and on it goes. Just a kind of an embarrassment of riches for this first year. We'll see how it works. Whether this will sustain itself. I believe it will, and I think the objective of this is to put this festival kind of like on a par with a handful of other major events like this that are in the West, particularly the Sun Valley Writers Conference and the Aspen Ideas Festival. Probably those are two that spring to mind to celebrate, letters in the Southwest, but also Santa Fe cuisine. And, there's going to be all kinds of field trips so that participants can get out and be with authors and have a little bit more intimacy than just, some giant festival. Like, there are a few in the country that are huge, but they've almost gotten too huge. There's very little sense of where you can actually meet with writers. So I think that's the goal here, is to make this kind of a heavily curated but very, very intimate, small scale festival, but with large scale ambitions in terms of the quality of the people that are going to be coming. So that's it in a nutshell.
Can anybody sign up to come? Open to the public,
anyone,
right?
Open to the public. There are fees for these events, of course, and it's depends on your level of how deeply you want to get into it. But and my involvement has just been mainly to rope in some writer friends of mine to come to Santa Fe. It's really not a tough ask usually to get people to get on a plane and come to Santa Fe anyway. And John Grisham's a friend of mine, and so I'm going to be interrogating him on stage about his career and his most recent book. So it's going to be a great event on so many levels.
When I heard about it, I was like, ooh, could I make this work going to Santa Fe? I've actually never been to Santa Fe. It's on my wish list of American cities that I have yet to check out. Anyway, so it's May 20th to 23rd, 2022. Everybody should go. Very cool.
Please come. And we'll have plenty of chili here for anyone, whether it's red or green. And, and this is the first year. We'll see. I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger as the years go by. So
cool. I've always sort of wanted to start my own literary festival, which is, I know, pie in the sky dream, but you never know. Anyway, I'll have a lot of work. Yeah, that's the issue. Well, maybe I don't know. Anyway, it's very cool that you guys are doing this, and I'm sorry I can't be there this year, but I want to come one of these years because it sounds amazing. Okay, in addition to your role of festival starter, most people probably know I knew you because of Ghost Soldiers, which I read when it came out a while back and loved it. And I still have it. I can't find it, but I have it somewhere prominent because I see the cover all the time. So I feel like it might actually be in my mom's house. Anyway, I see it all the time. So I feel like this is such a treat just for that.
I know.
I actually listened to part of this book, which was really neat as I was bopping around New York City listening to, ice flows and former newspaper editors and people stranded and all of that. So it definitely made my walk from drop off a little more exciting. Can you tell listeners a little bit about your latest project and how you stumbled upon this story and why you felt compelled to share it?
Well, In the Kingdom of Ice is a story that I kind of found out about through the back door kind of thing, where I got an assignment with National Geographic to write about a Norwegian explorer. They sent me to Oslo to learn about this explorer, Fridtjof Nansen, and to go to this museum in Oslo called the Fram, which is dedicated to this amazing vessel, the Fram, that both Nansen and other Norwegian explorers used to do all these exploits during the heroic age of exploration. And when you go to the Fram Museum, you keep seeing references to this earlier expedition, an American-led expedition that tried to reach the North Pole by sailing to the North Pole, because there were these, at that time, rather crazy ideas that there was a warm water basin at the top of the world. You had to get through the ice, but then there was going to be this, almost like a bathtub of warm water, then you could just sail to the North Pole. Obviously, mistaken science there. A group of Americans starting in 1879 tried to do just that, and their ship got caught in the ice, drifted in the ice for 2 years. And finally, the ship was crushed by the ice and sank to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. And these 33 men and their 40 dogs were stranded very near the North Pole, but they didn't make it to the North Pole. Now it was just a question of their own survival. How are they going to make it home. And that, so I kept seeing references to this Jeannette expedition, this American-led expedition in Oslo. And because this Norwegian explorer, Fridtjof Nansen, basically tried to duplicate the American expedition, but to do it in a differently designed vessel, a vessel that he thought could withstand the pressure of the ice, because it was clear they were drifting in the right direction. Generally speaking, the prevailing currents and the prevailing flow of the ice pack was bringing them to the North Pole. I won't belabor the story of Nansen. That's a whole nother chapter. And there's endless appeal, I think, out there. I found in writing this book for these Arctic tales of woe. It's like there's just people out there who can't get enough of Shackleton and the Endurance, and Nansen, of course, and all the different American attempts on the North Pole. There's something about the hardship, the kind of monotony of the landscape, the just being stripped down to the elements, and of course the classic themes: scurvy, mutiny, cannibalism. How these guys survive against all odds. Of course, often they don't survive. That's the big question. And of course, with this book, I don't exactly say, when you open up the jacket and you read the flap copy, I don't say what happened to these men, because, and this is really why I wrote, this is finally the answer to your question. Why did I?
No, take your time.
Why did I write this? Is that I felt like this is a story that should be kind of in the national shorthand of heroic survival stories. This is the American Shackleton story. And why wasn't it well known? I mean, why? I mean, if you asked people, 100 people on the streets of there in New York, have you heard of the voyage of the USS Jeannette? Probably like 3 of them maybe have heard of it. It's a very obscure tale, and yet in its day, it was front page news, international news. Everyone knew the names of these voyagers. For almost 3 years, there was it's basically a vigil, of when will these men return? Will they return? Or did they die up there? Where are they? It's like sending men to the moon, of course, when back in those times, there was no way to communicate. So for all those reasons, I thought it was just a great classic, Gilded Age story of survival, essentially. And this was a time when America was beginning to finally emerge from the devastation of the Civil War and begin to kind of flex its muscles on the world stage and compete with the European powers in various ways. And this was partly a scientific expedition. It wasn't just an adventure. They were trying to prove all kinds of scientific and pseudo-scientific theories. And so it's just kind of an interesting time where you begin to see a glimpse of modern America. And all of this is happening at the same time. A newspaper publisher, who you alluded to earlier, James Gordon Bennett, who was the publisher of the largest newspaper in the world at that time, the New York Herald, he personally bankrolled this expedition. Even though it was run by the U.S. Navy, it was paid for by this eccentric dude from New York who nearly stole the show. For me, when I was writing this book, I became so infatuated with this eccentric playboy, multimillionaire guy who, he had sent Stanley to find Livingston in Africa and had this huge blockbuster newspaper hit with that series of stories. And he was looking for another adventure to bankroll, to really just to create great copy for his newspaper. And it's
as opposed to the animals escaping the zoos and all of that.
Yeah. He was into, he was not above creating,
drama.
Dramas on the page that were not exactly true, just to prove some kind of weird point or eccentric idea that he had. But anyway, for all these reasons, I just thought it was just a fascinating story that I thought everyone should know about in this country. And of course, I think also there is this thing that a lot of historians yearn for or fantasize about, and that is, finding an obscure story that was important and consequential in its day, and resuscitating that story and hopefully bringing it back to the level where you think it ought to be, sort of in the pantheon of tales of American history.
No, you communicated that so well in the book when you were saying, like, this was the event of the summer. Like, this is what everybody was doing, is hanging on all of these updates, right? And it's hard to believe sometimes that the things that we all collectively find so important, right, and that grip our attention, like an election or this or that, and that in 100 years is something nobody's even going to remember, and somebody's just going to have to dig and say, "Oh yeah, this was like a really big deal at the time."
Yeah,
It makes what we're going through now get put into more perspective.
yeah, yeah.
You know.
Now, most of the story takes place in Russia. And, I think that our relationship with Russia back then was very complicated and weird, but actually on friendlier terms, much friendlier terms than it is now. I went to Russia, I went to Siberia to research the book, which was a really fascinating trip in and of itself, because, this was where they finally made landfall, dragging these small boats across the ice pack and then finally sailing across the Arctic Ocean. They made landfall in this really, really remote part of Yakutia, Siberia, which is 400 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And just to get there, it took, like a week of planes, trains, and automobiles to finally get to this spot. And that was a big part of the story, actually, for me also, was to physically go to these places where these men, so I'll tell you this, some make it home. They don't all make it. I'm not going to say who makes it and who doesn't. It is just, you think, well, they finally made it to open water and they're getting into their small boats to sail across their journey is basically over now. And then you think, okay, they're making landfall. Now their ordeal is over. No, their ordeal is just beginning, and winter is starting to arrive, and they're starting to freeze to death, and they have to fend off, polar bears, and they have to hunt for their food, and it just goes on and on and on. So, that's I guess another aspect of the story that really appealed to me, is that it just has all these phases, of suffering. It's like suffering porn, I guess.
I feel like, though, you're drawn to this, right? A lot of your stories are about getting through what seems like unbearable misery for a human to withstand. Where does that come from?
I really don't know. I don't think I personally am that sort of person. And I'm not someone who likes to test myself physically. But I came, before I was a historian, I worked for a good number of years for a magazine called Outside. Mm-hmm. And Outside, when I was an editor there, we were always looking for these kinds of stories of survival stories, but also just that theme of sort of what combination of traits are people able to summon to get through an ordeal of some sort? What kind of leadership qualities do they have? What kind of, maybe a sense of humor to get through a situation that is obviously not funny? So that's a theme that kept coming up there. And it probably sort of through osmosis, I picked up a lot of that. But it is a kind of classic theme. It's like, I'm always wondering how I would have gotten through an ordeal like this. And I think the readers are too. As they turn pages, they're thinking, how would I get through that? And what combination of attributes do I have within me? Sometimes to your own surprise, often these guys, they don't know they have this, and it's, what's also interesting is that almost invariably there's some guy way down on the pecking order, mm-hmm. who emerges as the real heroic person. It's not necessarily the officers. Some of my books are set in war, and that's often true. Is the real heroes are the grunts sometimes, who never knew they had it in them, and then they find out under pressure.
Has this happened to you? Has there been a situation in your life where you didn't know how much resilience you had until you were faced with it?
I suppose so. But nothing on the level of the books that I've written, where I've never been in a survival, like a dire emergency survival situation like that. But
sometimes it takes, though, these extremes, right, to get us out of something that we're struggling with ourselves in a way, right? Like most of us will never have to face things. knock wood here, but most of us will never know what it's like to have to, find our own food in an ice block or whatever. But there are certainly challenges we face every day where it's hard to get through or we're not sure how. And I think looking to situations, I feel like I'm drawn to memoirs, right, where people get through all these hard things like abuse or addiction or whatever. Like I'm drawn to those stories because it always it inspires me in a way, because whatever I'm going through, I'm like, well, I'm not going through that, but look at that. That was really extreme and they got through it. So that's helping me in like whatever silly thing I have to deal with, which doesn't feel silly to me, but you know what I mean?
Right. Well, I guess I've been drawn to a number of these stories. My Ghost Soldiers was which you say you read a long time ago, was about the Bataan Death March, which is one of the worst chapters in American military history. Yes. The surrender at Bataan and the Death March leading to these prison war camps that were squalid and horrible and run by the Japanese, and how these men survived all of that only to face what seemed to be an imminent execution by the Japanese. And so the Americans found out about this and sent the U.S. Army Rangers in to try to rescue the last survivors of the Death March. I mean, I guess that theme is there in that book as well. So maybe it's looking back over, I've done now 6 of these. That theme is present in almost all of the books that I've written. So different versions, different iterations of it. But yeah.
You can just take this back to therapy this week and see what you can make of it. I'm kidding. I was looking though on your website before, and to your point about the Bataan Death March, and I mean, I just sat here like staring at the men who are so emaciated, the prisoner. I mean, it's hard to even imagine like that level of suffering, and just staring at what becomes of a grown man's body. It's like similar to Holocaust pictures, and there's just this something gruesome, and you can't take your eyes off it as you try to wrap your brain around it. But anyway.
Well, and the other joy, the real joy of doing that book and some of these other books that I've done is getting to meet these guys, into their lives as they're looking back and trying to ask again these same questions. How did I get through that? Why did I survive and so many of my comrades didn't? And the grace and the stoicism that most of them had, I'll take that with me for the rest of my life. And unfortunately, most of them have passed on. Almost, I'm sure all of them have at this point. But that was one of the greatest experiences of my writing career, was getting to know these. They call themselves the battling bastards of Bataan, and and these are tough dudes. And
well, it's one thing for you to resuscitate so many of these lost stories or highlight well-known ones and from a historian's perspective, but it's another to then be able to write them in such a vivid, captivating, sort of propulsive way, as if we don't know the ending of these things, where sometimes you just know the ending already. So how did you get into that part of writing? Like, how did you hone that skill? Is it practice? Did you know you wanted to write? Did you know more you just wanted to tell the stories and writing came after? Like, how did writing itself fit into your career trajectory and make you into this author now?
Well, I guess academic history has often quite well-deserved reputation for being deadly dull. Chloroform in print, it'll put you to sleep real quick. Most academic history, I went to Yale.
I went to Yale too.
And I was a history major, and I don't regret it. It was some of the greatest, that was one of the great history departments in the country. But I don't really remember like the word pleasure being often ascribed to the reading of history, the writing of history, the kind of history that we were taught to in our thesis papers, or to write. It was kind of more legalistic writing. It was like, come up with an argument, come up with a thesis, and then summon your data to prove your thesis and build your argument towards a summation that really proves that your thesis was absolutely correct. And then you might even go in personally and defend your thesis in front of your professors. And that's kind of a legalistic I mean, it's almost like a bunch of lawyers took over the history departments of America a long time ago, forgetting that there's all these other kinds of writing, the other ways of telling history that should be at least equally valid. Narrative being the one that I seized on, I guess. Like history can be really interesting to read if someone pays attention to the way it's written. And not just do you have the data? Do you have the facts? Do you have the argument? Do you have the provocative thesis? But just, like all the qualities that make for a good novel or a good screenplay or a good piece of drama on stage, some of those kinds of qualities, apply them to the raw stuff of history. And then you end up with, a beautiful narrative that reads sometimes at its best like a novel, but happens to be true. And so weirdly, I think that so I grew up in Memphis, and the first writer that I ever met was a narrative historian, and he was one of the best. He was this Civil War historian named Shelby Foote, who wrote this massive trilogy of the Civil War and was the kind of the star on the Ken Burns documentary, on the Civil War. With the beard and the pipe and the amazing Delta accent. And his son, Huggy, and I were friends. And we were.
Oh, I know him.
You know Huggy?
Yeah. I went to dinner. I know him. I went to dinner at my friend Lee Carpenter and Elliot Ackerman's house, and he was there.
Yeah. Well, we're good friends, and we were in a band together. And
oh my gosh, stop. Too funny.
We were like trying to do everything we could to prevent his father, Shelby, from actually writing the trilogy of the Civil War by cranking up the Hendrix and the Pink Floyd, But anyway, I got to know Shelby in high school, and then after college, did a series of interviews with him, and I think he was enormously influential in terms of explaining what this sort of subgenre is, of narrative history, where you don't have footnotes, you don't necessarily have an argument, a thesis. I think you'd be hard pressed to figure out what Shelby Foote's thesis was of the 2,000 page trilogy, other than he wanted people to turn pages. He wanted people to. It was interested in character, primarily character development. He was interested in plot. He was interested in things like foreshadowing and, highlighting an event that happened, in 1861, and then somehow building in a crescendo towards things that happened at say Appomattox. And so, these are things that were kind of rubbed off on me. It's like, oh, the stuff of history can be literature, at least can aspire to be literature. And I don't know that, I'm not saying I've always succeeded at that, but I've always aspired to that. And so I think that's where it came from. Combination of, Yale was, oh my gosh, some of the greatest lecturers, some of the greatest characters on who in that history department. But I didn't love, gosh, I hated history papers. I hated that argumentative style. I hated expository writing. I guess I spent all my time in college actually working on campus newspaper, like the Yale Daily News and a magazine called the New Journal, which I was the editor of. So I guess, I was always straddling the fence between, am I a journalist or am I a historian? And I think even today, I think of myself as a journalist who writes about history, as opposed to just a historian, which I know a lot of people say, you can't even call yourself a historian unless you have a PhD in history. I don't buy that, but there is that school of thought. So
I don't talk to those guys. And then quickly, what are you working on now? Are you at work on another adventure?
Yeah. Well, my most recent book actually was a book about a battle in the Korean War called The Chosin Reservoir. And that came out 2 years ago, just before COVID. I timed it just right, I think. But now I'm working on a book about the third voyage, the final voyage of Captain Cook, James Cook. Not Captain Hook, that was the pirate, and not Captain Crunch, who is one of my favorite captains, but Captain Cook, who in his third voyage was given this assignment to go try to figure out, it's taken me right back to where the Jeannette story took place, which is, Alaska and Siberia. He was trying to get up and over Alaska or through Alaska and find the Northwest Passage. And of course, he didn't find it. All he found was ice, and he nearly got caught in the ice twice. And but along the way, he stumbled upon this island called Hawaii that was not on any maps. And so he was the first European discoverer of Hawaii. And so when the ice nearly trapped him in Alaska, he decided, I got to go back south and winter somewhere warm. Why don't we go back to that lovely place, Hawaii? And he did. And of course, he was murdered in Hawaii by the native Hawaiians. And so it's another sprawling adventure story, I guess, with a pretty resounding and controversial ending. It's been weird working on this book because Captain Cook, like so many white dude explorer types from the colonial era, is being canceled all over the world. And statues are coming down or being vandalized. He's kind of persona non grata in New Zealand now and Australia and all over Polynesia, of course, somewhat for, somewhat understandable reasons, although Captain Cook was really an explorer. He was an explorer and a relatively enlightened explorer and one of the greatest navigators of all time. But exploration is generally viewed as the first wave of colonialism. You got to find these places first and put them on the map, which he did. And then what came after Cook is a whole nother story of, but anyway, so I'm working on this thing. It's I've got a zillion books here behind me. I've been reading and traveling. This, unfortunately, is a project that has required a lot of hardship travel to places like Tahiti, all over French.
So sorry for you.
Hawaii, New Zealand. Someone's got to do it. And
turns out it's you.
During COVID, I've been, between lockdowns and so forth, I've been having some pretty interesting trips in the wake of Captain Cook.
Well, I can just see that whole trailer. Not Captain Hook. Anyway, my 7-year-old son could make you a really fun trailer for that if you wanted. Well, I'm sure that your panel at the Santa Fe Literary Festival with John Grisham will be amazing, and that sounds like a totally unique opportunity. So if any listeners are going to be in Santa Fe, March 20th to 23rd, when is your actual panel? Do you even know?
No, May 20th.
All right, May. Oh my gosh. May. Yeah, I can't speak. May 20th to 23rd. Anyway, Hampton, thank you so much. This was really fun. Thanks for chatting with me.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.